back to Clorinda. I don't know. I was reading a lot. I always have been interested in reading health books and journals and things. And I started to really study about fermentation and gut health and fermented food and how good it is for you. And it just became a real interest of mine. And at about the same time, my husband got very into gardening. And we were growing all this huge amount of produce. And what do you do with it? And 9,000 radishes or 5 cabbages. And, you know, you can only eat so much fresh. And then you kind of need to figure out a way to preserve it. And so we started getting into this and doing fermentation as a means of preserving our food. If you think about it, fermented food, we were talking about it a little bit too, everything is going to decompose. So the fermentation process is basically trying to control that a little bit and make it a productive thing and not a, where it's just going to go back to the soil, right? And so we're going to control that. Fermentation has been around us for thousands of years. And if you take one thing away from this, try to remember that fermented food is preserved food. I have had friends that I was coaching them how to do this and very anxious about it. And it's on the counter and won't it spoil? And fermented food is preserved. So refrigeration and canning have not been around that long in our vast history. Does anyone know the history of canning? So I wrote about it a little bit in my presentation, but canning was initially Napoleon. He offered a 12,000 franc, I think it was 12,000 franc reward if someone could figure out a way to keep their food from spoiling. And so the guy, what was his name? Anyway, he came up with Nicholas Appert, or I don't know how you say it in French, but he was a chef and he came up with a glass jar and I think he sealed it with wax. And maybe some people remember their mom or an older person, a person in history, not necessarily older, but someone, we don't do it as much anymore. They don't recommend it as a preservation, but you would melt the wax and put it maybe in the top of your jelly or jam, and it would keep the bacteria at bay. And it would, as it hardened, it would seal that food. So it was in the jar. So that was how initially canning was. And that was like 1795 to 1810 in there. And then it progressed and got more complex throughout the 19th century. They found ways to preserve it in tin. And I think at some point they were probably using lead, and it probably was worse to eat that food than if you hadn't. But, you know, all these things come around and people figure out better ways to do it. And then in the early 1900s, I think it became like a competition with Ball and Kerr, and they were making the sealable lids and then kind of in the 1900s, the 20th century, kind of now we're pretty good with, if you can at all, you see the metal lid with the little rubber gasket, and you put it in the boiling canner, and as it cools, it makes it seal. And so that was how canning came around. And refrigeration, the about 1840s, they were making those basic ice boxes, maybe had a tin container, and they'd put the block of ice in, and it would keep that whole box cool. You could put your milk in there or your butter or whatever, so it wouldn't spoil. But people would just leave things in their cupboard. And refrigeration until like 1950s, about 80% of the households, certainly in the US, had refrigerators, as we know, and they've gotten better, and automatic ice makers and whatnot. But so really, there had to be ways to keep food so it was edible beyond the week that I get those green beans out of the garden or whatever. So fermentation is a great preservation method. If any of you are curious, I have a sample. Over here, this table, I have things that we have fermented. I have made yogurt, kefir. I don't know if anyone knows what that is. There's these little beads, and you pour milk over it, and it ferments in a couple of days, and it has thousands of probiotics, more than yogurt. And it's great in baked goods. Anywhere you would use sour cream, you can use kefir. These are some pickles that I made. Pickles, it's a slightly different process than sauerkraut because you saline salt. The sauerkraut is just salt. This is a saline solution you pour over, put some seasonings, herbs, and whatnot. These are pickled jalapenos, very spicy. This is my sauerkraut, and this is sourdough starter. I make sourdough bread regularly. And this is kombucha, which is a fermented tea, if you've ever heard of that. After we're done, you can, if you want samples, I have little cups and little forks. If there's anything you're like, I've always wanted to try that, well, we can hook you up. Getting on to the sauerkraut presentation part. So I first started in just a mason jar. So I like it because you can stick your hand in. And it's easy to, it's accessible, right? If I don't, like I want to try it, but I don't want a giant investment, I can certainly get a jar, cut up some cabbage, make some sauerkraut. Do I like it? No, I don't. I'm not going to do this anymore. Or, oh, I love it. You know, I'm going to make bins and bins of it. You might want to upgrade to a crock method. And I just got this crock off the internet. This is Sour Crock by Humble House. And it comes with its own little weights, which is handy, and a lid. So, you know, you can make it as simple or more complex. For the simple method, I have my mason jar. And then I did get some weights, because one of the keys to fermentation is keeping the food submerged in the liquid. So fermentation is an anaerobic process. So you want to, anaerobic means the oxygen isn't getting to that. So if it's submerged below the liquid, the oxygen isn't going to come. It's gonna ferment down in there under the liquid, and then this fermentation process is going to preserve that food. Okay, so for sauerkraut, you need cabbage, and I have already shredded my cabbage. There's many different ways you can shred it. You can use a box grater, an ordinary grater. I have used this side of the grater. I have used this side of the grater. I don't think I would want it this fine. This is more for, like, I think cloves or something, herbs or something. But so the big one, for a large bunch of cabbage, I go to my food processor. I have used, if you know, I should have brought my food processor, but there's a blade. I've done that, but it's very easy for it to go to mush. So I usually use the grater attachment for my food processor, but you still have to cut your cabbage into little pieces that can go into the feeding tube. But anyway, so here I have grated cabbage. So the general rule, this fermentation is a very flexible, there's no like exact, well, I have to put 1 teaspoon of salt in this. It's really to your taste and how you like it. You need enough salt to preserve it. Too much, it can be way too salty, and not enough, and it will spoil. So you do need enough. I weighed this, and this is 1.2 pounds of shredded cabbage. The general rule of thumb is 1.5 teaspoons for a pound. So 3 teaspoons equals 1 tablespoon. You probably know that. So I will probably use a tablespoon because it's more than a pound. So it would be like 2. So I think I'm safe to use a scant tablespoon of salt for this much cabbage. I talk about it in the recipe sheet that I provided, but I prefer to use just canning salt. So our salt that table salt, Morton's, or I hate to use a brand name, but salt that you just buy, like just salt, is highly refined. They've stripped all the minerals out of it, and then that's why they have to add the iodine back into it. Sea salt naturally has some minerals in it, some iodine and some other minerals. So I like to either use sea salt. I like to use Himalayan sea salt because it's real ancient from the source, whatever. But pickling salt is actually, this is what I use the most. Another ingredient people don't realize that is often in salt is silicones, and they're anti-caking agents. So your salt doesn't become a hard, ball of salt in there. So that isn't the best for making sauerkraut and other fermented food. So I like this. It's just salt or sea salt or the Himalayan sea salt. But your ordinary tables, and I don't like iodine. So I don't get iodized sea salt. I just get sea salt, it's just salt, or this is just salt. So that's the salt. We talked about the vessel. We talked about the cabbage and shredding the cabbage. Okay. So this is shredded, and I'm going to add my salt. I'm going to measure it over here. So if I have a big old blob, it won't be too much. And it's easier to add, it's harder to take away, right? So I can always add more salt if I don't think this is quite right yet. So I'm gonna, put this in. So I've just sprinkled the salt over. I usually use my hands, but I brought this. This is just a tool that I use for ground beef, but it's perfect for this application. So I'm just I'm just working it in there. This was that giant we had 4 giant cabbages from our garden this year. So this was one of them. And, but it's been in the fridge about a month, that cabbage. We probably harvested it in July. I also realized that the ambient temperature is going to affect your ferments. So right now we're starting to get a little bit cooler. If I do a ferment in July, we do not keep our house that cold. So it's going to be much warmer in my kitchen or in wherever I have this than say in December, right? But actually, to tell you the truth, one of my favorite times to make sauerkraut is March. Who knows why? Because I read it. It is cabbage goes on sale because of St. Patrick's Day. So I get it for like 29 cents a pound. I'm like, hey, I'll make some sauerkraut. So I'm just going to work that salt into this cabbage. I don't know if people can see it, but it starts to release liquid. Now this isn't very wet yet. So you just sort of work it in. You can use a potato masher, whatever you have. I usually just use my hands. Yes.
Other than just getting too salty to want to consume it.
Yeah.
Is too much salt stop?
I don't think so. It's just it would be unedible.
Okay.
It would just not taste good. Did I write about that? I can't remember. I have I don't know if I wrote down I didn't write down my source. I bought a book on my Kindle, and it's called The Art of Fermentation. If you're interested in this, the library doesn't have the book. So I had to buy that one. But it's a really good resource. And that guy, what is his name? Sandor Katz, I think is his name. And he just was a fellow who got really interested in, and now I think he even presented at Living History Farms in Des Moines. And it's a very thorough, it covers lots of different fermentation topics. And again, he's pretty casual about, like, as far as a recipe or like an exact, it's more like you have guidelines of how salty you want, like your saline solution or, you know, for the cabbage or whatever. So I am going to taste this to see, like, it's pretty salty, but it's not unbearably salty. So that's usually my general rule of thumb. So I'm just mixing this up. I usually sort of let it sit for, you know, the longer you let it sit and work with it like this, the more liquid's going to be released. But I'm usually not that patient. So I just put it in the jar and see what happens. Yes.
Shredding size. Talk about shredding it.
Yep.
Does it make a difference if you
it does not
big stuff? You know, it's
if you like the big one, you know, you're going to have
We're thinking more like the leaves that show up in kimchi size.
Sure. The reason you shred it, like I suppose this would ferment eventually, right? But I'm going to have more salt to surface area. For if you have a smaller shred, there's more little pieces that can get salted on them to release the lactic acid, which is what makes it sour. That's what makes all ferments sour, is the lactic acid. And that's also what, you know, like if you look at a probiotic bottle, or it's like L. pylori or whatever, it's basically lactobacillus. Yes, thank you. Lactobacillus. It's the lactic acid that's been released into that. And, you know, there's various kinds of probiotics, but the L is the lactobacillus. And that basically, I think almost all vegetables would eventually release it. Like I have fermented pickles, cucumbers, sour, you know, jalapenos. I have made fermented salsa, radishes. You know, I think almost anything would ferment eventually. It's just how good is that going to taste? Is that something I even want to consume? You know, I have learned to like sauerkraut mostly because it's just so good for you. We take it almost like a daily vitamin. Like I get it out, we have the jar, and we have a little bite of it with our breakfast. You know, you just kind of get used to that. Or you could have a pickle, or you know, it's kind of like, what's your fermented food today? So that's kind of how we do that. I keep some of the cabbage leaves because they can be useful to put in the top of the jar to keep, again, to keep it submerged and to protect it from, molds or whatever. You don't really have to worry. Like people, again, when you're just beginning, people are like, what if there's some scum on the top? Yep, you might get a little bit of scum. You just strain it off and throw it out, and it will not, because the rest of it's submerged. So any bit, even it wouldn't hurt you. It just maybe wouldn't taste very good. It would be very difficult for anything to like kill you from this. So I would hate to say impossible, and then someone come back and say, but you said it wasn't possible. You know, like botulism is serious business. Like if your canning wasn't canned properly, which is why they're so serious about like, don't use the wax anymore. Let's do real canning and fresh lids. And, you know, during COVID, you couldn't get canning lids. And I was kind of reusing them. And I'd be like, if I gave it to somebody, I'd be like, put it in the fridge right away, because that's a reused canning lid, because, you know, we couldn't get them. They were very, very short supply. I feel like this is starting to, I don't know if you guys can see it, but it is pretty wet looking, and it is starting to release a good bit of liquid. So in a couple minutes, I'm going to go ahead and put it in there. You will notice it is fairly bright green. I don't know if you can see, but it's fairly bright green. And then if you look at, this is mine. I don't know, I made this about a month ago. And it's changed vastly in color. It's more olive green, and this is bright green like the cabbage, right? So it will change color. Another thing you will notice, it will bubble like crazy. So like sometimes I even, just because it's fun, I'll just kind of stomp the jar and all the bubbles, like when you pour a pop and the bubbles rise to the top. It's very much like that. So I just think it's the funnest thing to watch this basically chemistry experiment. It is funny when people come to our house and there'll be jars. What do you got in that jar? And I'll be like, oh, that's, you know, I'm fermenting jalapenos, or that's sauerkraut, or kimchi, or whatever. The kimchi I do not ferment as long. I only do about 3 days because it gets strong. Kimchi, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it is it's Korean ferment, and I like it best with what's that? There's Napa cabbage, which I really like. Bok choy. and it grows great in Iowa. So, and people are like, what do you do with bok choy? And I'm like, kimchi. It is, because it grows really well here. Early, kind of like May, like it's, you know, early in the growing season, I guess. So, all right, wish me luck. I'm gonna try to pour this into my jar. Oh, I don't think I talked about this. He talks about that in that book. This does not need to be sanitary. Like when I do canning, I'm boiling those jars for 10 minutes and leaving them in the hot water till right before I put the food in. This is, fermentation is gathering stuff from the air as well as this process in here. So this is a clean jar. I washed it, it's clean. And my hands are clean, I washed them, but they're not like, I don't have gloves on. It's not like a sanitary. So there's a difference between sanitary, I would use wipes or something. It's clean, but it's not sanitary. So you don't have to get too fussed. It's clean, but it's not. Okay, there's quite a bit of liquid in here. I will say too, I didn't have one of these for years. It's super useful.
Best $2.
Best $2 you're gonna spend. And I didn't bring my spatula. You know, I remembered a lot of stuff, and Jim went back home twice. All right, so most of it's in there. I have a little bit left in here when I get home. Okay, that is, look at all that liquid. Can you see that?
Yeah, nice.
Quite a bit of liquid just sort of bubbling out. And it's, you can see that there. You can come up or if you have any, but it's a lot. It's a lot of liquid that has come out of that cabbage. So.
And that's a month-old cabbage.
That's a month. When it's fresh, like it's like pouring out. So, and this is wet, but it's not like, you know, filled with water, right? So again, you basically just want it so that it is submerged. I just got these off the internet. These are just fermentation weights. And depending on how full the jar is, like I probably, if I was at home, I would probably shred some more cabbage because this isn't all the way to the top. You don't want very much air in there because the air is kind of the enemy of this process. So I would probably put a little more cabbage in there, just so you know. This was 1.2 pounds. So I guess probably 1.5 pounds of shredded cabbage would be about the exact amount you need. So, so I sometimes put multiple weights in there. Again, when I talked at the beginning and I said, you know, how much do you want to invest in this? Let's say you're like, man, I'm not that sure. I want to, you can use a jelly jar in there, right? Basically, I just need to get that thing weighed down so that.
Can you move the salt box? No, there you go. Thank you.
Certainly I can. Good tip. You could use this. You could use, I have, this is the really low, you could fill a baggie. I would probably put saline water in there. So I can do this. And then I have a little salt left so that if it leaks out, I'm putting salinated water in there. So, no, this is, I'm sorry, this is filtered water. So should be no chlorine in it because chlorine kills fermentation. All right, so this is where you might use your cabbage leaf, you know, just as a additional weight to keep it submerged. I can put my, oh, that wasn't sealed. That wasn't good. But you know, you could, you're getting the idea. There's various ways to weigh it down if you didn't want to invest in, you know, weights. Okay, then I have lid with a little hole in it, but you could probably just take a metal ball jar lid and tap a nail in it to get a hole. You just don't want, the nice thing about this is called airlock. Airlock is it lets the bubbles escape as it's fermenting, but it doesn't let oxygen in. So there's a little line on here, and you just put water, or you could put salinated water up to the line. And then this is how I do it. And then, but like I said, you could put a normal lid. If you put just the normal lid on, remember to burp it. So you just kind of like loosen the lid once a day, as it's really, the first 3 days are super active with the bubbles and the fermentation. So you'd want to, like I said, I just kind of stamp it and it lets the bubbles go and maybe burp it. If you don't, the water will just ooze out. It'll just, so I usually have a tray or something underneath it so that if I have an overflow, it won't hurt anything. So if I have bigger amounts of cabbage, or what else have we fermented? Pickles, I use this. If I felt like, if I looked at that and went, boy, there's not enough liquid in there, you can just add some water or some saline. This is pretty salty already, so I would probably just go ahead and put the filtered water to bring the water level up a bit. So that is pretty much how you make sauerkraut. I don't think I forgot. Let's see, did I forget anything? Is anybody? Oh wait, my mom used to. Oh, the temperatures, we talked about that a little bit. The color change, the fizz, yeah.
Dark, you said it in the dark.
Oh, nope, you know what? It should just not be in the direct sunlight. Like I wouldn't put it right in the window, but a little, you know, just normal room light is fine. I try to put it, like I don't want it in the busiest part of my kitchen. I actually put my last one in the sewing room, because I go in there every few days, but I'm not in there all the time. I would start checking, we like our sauerkraut pretty crunchy. So it's basically just like fermented coleslaw almost. And we just eat it like a salad. Like it's especially good with pizza. Like I just love, somehow it complements the cheese, and it's good with sandwiches or whatever. Also, I don't can it, because that heat is going to kill the probiotics. Okay, so I just keep this in the fridge. I keep jars and they last a year. Yes.
What are the benefits of probiotics?
Oh, good question, sir. That's my husband. He's a plant. You know, Andrew talked about it a little bit. They're really good for your gut health. So the more you do research and study, and if you're interested in it, but what we feed our gut is what's gonna it's like the brains of your whole body. And eating high fiber is good, the more fruits and vegetables. And then fermented food also feeds the good bugs. So we want to feed the good bugs. Eating like sugar and highly processed food feeds the bad bugs, and then our bodies get out of balance. So it's a good way to bring your body back into balance by eating some fermented food. We eat fermented food every day. Like I said, we either have the sauerkraut like a pill, we have the kefir in our smoothies, we eat sourdough bread. There's very few days we don't have fermented food so at our house. So, but I like my sauerkraut kind of crunchy. If you like it hot, that's fine, but you're going to kill the probiotics. Like if I would put this in a pan and heat it up, I'm going to kill the probiotics. So we just eat it room temp or cold, and then you're not killing the probiotics. So what other questions? Yes.
How long do you ferment?
Oh, no, thank you. That's good.
Yeah.
I start tasting it in about 5 days. You'll notice a lot of bubbles first 3 days or so. You can taste it every day if you want, just to like, hey, what's happening with my sauerkraut today? It's very flexible. I think this one I forgot about it. It might've been like a month. You know, the smaller the vessel, the faster it will ferment. Like, I don't know, people remember their mom or grandma making them in giant crocks, and they would leave it all winter or go scoop out a bit. But it was just a bigger vessel, so it maybe fermented a little slower. I like about a week to 10-day ferment personally. I write notes on everything. Usually I write notes on the lid when I made it, because these lids are great for that. I just get a Sharpie, sauerkraut, July 2022. So I know it's been 2 years, maybe I should throw it away. Or, you know, oh, that was that really good batch we made, you know, and or the one I made at St. Patrick's Day or whatever. So yeah, I start tasting it, and then I'll have Jim taste it and be like, what do you think? Oh, he'll go a couple more days, try another week, and then we'll taste it again. So again, it's very flexible. It's to your taste. If you like it crunchy, if you like it mushier, it's all just how you like it.
Speaking of taste, can you add other stuff? Like
You
other
can.
seasonings?
You can. Oh, in fact, Jane Davidson got this from one of the seasoning ones, and the guy said it was really good in sauerkraut. I didn't use it today, but I could have. Some people put all kinds of things, little seeds, and you know, look at the internet and just see what you, or kimchi has so many things. It's got ginger and onions and garlic, and you could put garlic in it. I am a purist with my sauerkraut. I just like salt and cabbage, and it makes it simple. Like I would suggest maybe the first time you do it, just make it simple, and then be like, oh, grandma used to put, why is it when there's some herb that people, caraway. Lots of people like caraway in it. And you could put that in. I am a person who I would make it simple and then add stuff when I'm preparing it maybe. But yeah, I've done red cabbage. The worry with red cabbage is it will stain everything. So we were growing red cabbages or purple cabbages, and it also sort of can bleed into like a gray color. So you know, you have this pretty purple cabbage, and then as you ferment it, it's kind of, it's just not as appealing of to look at, you know, we eat with our eyes first. So yeah, any other questions about that?
Yeah, so once you've decided
it's ready,
it's ready, then you put it in the fridge.
I do. I put it in the fridge, and I put a solid lid on it. So like, you know, I ferment in this, and then with the airlock, and then I put this lid back on and stick it in the fridge. And oh, another thing that was interesting, I read in that book, The Art of Fermentation, he talked about like, as the jar gets lower, more air can get in there to spoil. So I would probably transfer it to a smaller jar. Or if I'm giving it some away, somebody want to taste it, I have so many jelly jars, I would just put it in jelly jar here, have a taste. So then it's less likely to spoil, because as you go down, you want to, and I don't always do that, but it can get really mushy by the bottom and kind of meh. So if I was smart, but you're busy, you know, stick that, but as you notice it going down, maybe you would transfer it to this or the, you know, pint jars or whatever you have, if you have jars. I like glass. Plastic, I would just be worried about leaching, you know, whatever into it, or that smell will get in that plastic and never leave it if I ever wanted to use that container again. So yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
What about if you put the hole with the nail?
Oh yeah.
You know.
I would cover it with a tea towel or something. Basically, you don't want gnats and things getting in there.
Right.
But it is a living thing.
But that's just for the fermentation stage.
Right.
10 days.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
And then you want to put a solid lid so you don't, oops, there it dribbled out as I got it out of the fridge. So.
And then do you need to keep the kraut below the liquid level?
You know, I don't have a weight in this. We just eat it. It's not as, once it's done and it's in the fridge, the refrigerator is going to retard any more fermentation. It's too cold. It wants to be, it wants to be around 68 degrees. It doesn't want to be 38 degrees. So that's going to stop most fermentation, putting it in the refrigerator. I wouldn't freeze it because I'm not sure freezing kills the healthy probiotics. Too cold and too hot, I think, kills the healthy probiotics that are in there. So I have all my other ferments here as well. If anyone has any questions about the jalapenos or the pickles, or the sourdough, or the kombucha, or the kefir. Jim.
Talk about the what's cold or what we do.
Oh yeah, we have a little heat mat. So see, again, my husband's into gardening. So we have a little seed warmer, and we just got it. It was like $12 from Amazon or wherever online you like to. I don't mean to advertise for Amazon, but it keeps things just a little bit warmer. You know, like my kitchen is cold. It's 60 degrees. It wants to be like 68, 70 degrees. So that just warms it up just a little bit. I do that with my sourdough, or really any ferment. If it's just sitting on the counter, I plug that seed. It's just a little mat. It looks like a little heat pad or whatever, but it isn't real warm. It's just enough to bring it up a little bit.
It's designed to get seed beds up to about 70 degrees, which is great for seeds and great for fermenting.
My sister, she had put something in the oven because it was not as cold or whatever. And then they turned the oven on and then killed you killed the ferment. It was, I don't know, the sourdough or what they were fermenting, but it was just like, darn it. So you got some in the oven. It's like, oh, that's an accident waiting to happen. So yeah. Did you have some questions?
You talked about adding water.
Oh yeah.
Is the intent there to
to just be sure it's just to,
do you have to worry about?
I would do it like right now. Like if I was like, gosh, that isn't enough, I would do it immediately. I wouldn't do it like, because honestly, by tomorrow, the liquid, like you'll be, because it starts to release even more liquid out of the cabbage. Yeah, I would do it right away. If I was just too lazy to mush it very long, just add some water. I'm in a hurry, I gotta go. So yeah, it's super flexible, but yeah, I would just add, and like if it tasted salty enough to me, I would just add the regular filtered water. But I like to have I like those little weights and I usually use 2 because it really keeps it submerged, keeps that cabbage submerged below there. But like I said, you could put saline in this and weigh it down or whatever you got, but just be sure if you don't have a lid that you cover it with a tea towel or something, because you don't want bugs and junk to get in there. So I would just do that.
Do you fill it clear to the?
I usually do. You see it's really up there, right? And I just had the weight in there. And so this is, I took the weight out and put that in the fridge. So this is how I usually did. I just didn't quite have enough cabbage today. So, ooh, that's really smelly. If anyone wants samples of anything, that's why I brought them. So if you want to taste the sauerkraut or the kombucha or anything, just let me know. I've got forks and I've got little Dixie cups. So yeah.
You talk about adding things like caraway.
Oh yeah.
Is there anything you cannot?
I don't think so.
I mean, obviously meat or something like that.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to do meat or I think people put fruit in it, or I mean, it's all good. Little bits of apple, I suppose. Onion.
Like kimchi, they often tell you to put those itty bitty little shrimp in and mush them up. And
I don't have, my recipe doesn't for kimchi does not have those little bitty shrimp because that isn't appealing to me. But someone might really think that was a delicious treat. Mine has carrots. Let's see, carrots, candied ginger, gochujang. It's a Korean spice like paste. The Napa cabbage or the bok choy, garlic, salt, and that's it. But no meat is in my recipe that I make of kimchi. And I haven't made kimchi. Oh, I made sweet pickle relish that was fermented, and it was pretty good too. Like you can make, I mean, cucumbers really like to be fermented. and people are like, oh, you don't put any vinegar in? Nope, because the salt releases that lactic acid, and that is what makes it taste sour.
So the difference between fermenting and canning is that, if I understand this correctly, you have to have, once you ferment whatever, it has to be in the refrigerator.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
So
yes,
you either have to have a huge refrigerator in the garage, or
I guess you could. I mean, Grandma probably just put it in the basement, right? With, I think it would just spoil faster, and it might continue to ferment. But yes, you could certainly. Once this is ready, I could take this, get my canner out, put it in jars, put the lids on, can it. That is just great, but it will kill the probiotics. That's the only reason I don't do that. And we have 2 refrigerators.
So how often do you make sauerkraut?
When it's gone, I'll make more.
Which is?
Again, it depends. Am I giving it to my mom? Am I giving it to my daughter? Am I, we eating it? We have lots of bratwurst. Hey, let's have a big helping. Like I said, I just make it when I get down about here, I'll be like, ooh, but I have now 3 jars, so they'll last us a while. It'll last us a few months probably. And again, it depends on what else did I have fermented. I do have about 2 dozen of these large jars because I think they're very handy, and I use them for leftovers, soup. I like freeze. I make soup stock and freeze it in these, so I use these for a lot of stuff, and they're just handy, and they're $15 at the store or whatever. So yeah, you can can this. I just don't because I don't want to kill the probiotics. So, any other question?
One more question. So you'll leave that jar out on the counter for like 5 to 7 days?
A week to 2 months. Okay. It's super flexible, Nancy. You just
okay. Well, I can understand when you put it in the refrigerator. That's right.
Oh, when it tastes right to you.
Okay.
So I'll check this in a week. We'll taste it. And again, if I've really ground it up fine, it's going to ferment super fast. If it's super hot in my kitchen, it'll be really fast ferment. If it's cooler, the March one can go, a long time because it's cooler weather and my kitchen isn't as hot. And but when you say, oh, it tastes great to me, this is ready, that's when I put it in the fridge.
Okay.
But I would write a note, check the ferments, check it a week, check it in 2 weeks, check it a month. If you really, you just forget stuff, right? Like there it sits, and I'll be like, that's why I write a date. Like I'll have a little note, August 29th, and then check on September 14th, and then check on September 30th. And if it tastes, and then if it's really close, and Jim and I are like, oh, 2 more days, we'll check it in 2 days. It's just really to your taste. It will keep fermenting, and when you put it in the fridge, it will stop fermenting.
Okay.
Any other question? Any questions about sourdough or we've made yogurt. Yeah.
Any comments on what makes it go wrong?
Oh, yeah. I think temperature.
When it goes wrong, you know it too.
It tastes bad. It smells bad. I kind of alluded to this a little bit, but like you could get like a little scum on there, or it just that doesn't use your nose, because if it doesn't smell right, it should just smell like sauerkraut. It shouldn't smell like spoilage. Shouldn't smell like something the dog drug in. Again, it could be I let it go too long. I didn't have enough salt. It was too warm. My grind was too small. It's super flexible. And those things may have been okay a week before you checked it, and then it was too long, and then it didn't have enough salt, and it went, we had a question earlier, and she said, what happened to my sourdough starter? And we were talking about what she did, and I said, well, tap water, because it's got chlorine, and the chlorine will kill the happy bugs that want to grow in there. The chlorine wants to kill bacteria, all bacteria. It's indiscriminate.
We've been doing this for like 5 years. We've done everything wrong I think you can.
Yeah.
And we've never poisoned ourselves.
Right. We're still alive.
It's
true.
Right, don't eat it.
If it doesn't taste right, I just toss
it. It's not going to make you sick.
And by like a year from now, if I still have this, I might be like, actually what usually happens is I might still have some, and then the garden starts producing again. I'll get a batch of jalapenos, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, those are from last year. We can toss them out. And they still taste okay. They're not spoiled. They're just not as good anymore. And I've got a whole new batch, and it was salt and the free jalapenos that somebody gave me from their garden. So it isn't like I have a whole lot invested there that I'm worried about, that I spoiled that. So.
Can you talk about the funny thing in the jug on the right?
This
Yes.
one? Okay. This is kombucha, and it is fermented tea. So you basically start with Lipton tea.
Okay.
Yep. I boil water, and I do 4 tea bags and 1 cup of sugar. I didn't bring the mother. There's a mother. Looks like a rubbery disc. Okay. And I have some, and it grows new ones, and they split. So if you ever want one, can contact me. I can get you a mother. But the mother makes it ferment. So it's just tea. sugar tea. I leave it on the counter with the mother, and I use a gallon jar. So I don't boil a gallon of water because then I have to cool a gallon of water. So I boil a quart of water, put the 4 tea bags in, put the cup of sugar in, stir it, dissolve, fill my gallon jug with the sweet tea, and then fill it the rest of the filtered water. Use filtered water because chlorine kills it. Put that mother in and let it ferment on the counter for 2 weeks. And you can taste this if you want. It's
What's it good for?
Again, it's probiotics. It's a probiotic beverage. Some people think it works miracles. I don't think it works miracles. We like the way it tastes. It's kind of bubbly. It's kind of like carbonated. It's a little sour. Depends on how long you fermented it. If you over ferment it, it's eating all the sugar up and it's really sour. Yep, Mom.
The mother, you put it in and use it as long as you want, then you take
Reuse it. Yep.
Reuse it.
Reuse the mother. Yep.
I
Yep.
thought you had to use black tea, but you're saying. if
You do. Black tea. I just buy tea bags, Lipton, Tetley, whatever, black tea bags. I have made it with green, but you need at least some black tea. It's the thing that ferments the best. It needs to have caffeine in it, but it's my understanding it sort of eats some of the caffeine, but I think this is still slightly caffeinated. It's still got, the sugar is different. It's better for you because it's fermented, but if you had sugar issues, this is still got sugar in it, but it's fermented, so it's not as bad for you, is my understanding.
Is that the same mother as vinegar making?
It's similar, but it is a different mother. It's a kombucha mother. And it looks like a rubbery disc. It actually sort of morphs to the size of your lid like I have a jar I got at Walmart. It's a square jar, gallon jug. But if you had a taller one, like they used to make sun tea with, you could use that. But your mother would probably form into a more of a less
One
white.
of the things we use all of these foods for is like if you Nancy's very much, she's downplayed the probiotic that I think Andrew probably got from a relative, but you know, like if you've ever been on a course of antibiotics, those antibiotics are gonna like kill the bad bugs, but they also kill everything else in your intestines and everywhere else.
Even colonoscopy prep, right? You're killing everything in your gut. So you kind of want to rebuild that. And fiber is a good way because what we eat feeds our gut bugs. And but probiotics are a good way to sort of rebuild the healthy flora in your gut.
So if you have, you know, yogurt Nancy makes, the kombucha, the sauerkraut, all that stuff's building those good bugs back into your system after you've been through an illness or something like that.
Yeah, it's a good way to even sometimes, like if you feel a cold coming on, you're like, ooh, I better up the dose of sauerkraut, because I think it helps. Again, our gut health is helps our immunity, right? It helps us, you know, ward off.
Some people think it has a lot more even than that. Can even affect your emotions.
Yeah,
I mean, you can get as wackadoodle as you want, but there is some science.
We're pretty wackadoodle. Yep, wackadoodle's our name. Middle
I don't
name.
think you're too far off. When we're all constipated, we're all pretty irritable.
Oh, very true. That's not a problem at the Varley household.
Irritability.
Nope, not a problem. Even my mom, when she'd say, well, when I visit your house, I've never stopped up. So yeah, it does. It helps if you get stopped up.
Those people, like you said, that have taken antibiotics, then they develop the C. diff.
Yes.
So this is a wonderful.
Again, not a panacea, but I'm kind of it isn't going to do me any harm, and I like it. And
it was also a consequence of my crazy garden, because just like, all our grandparents, when you grow all this stuff,
you gotta do something.
You got to do something with it, because it's not like you get one cucumber, you get a bushel of cucumbers. So, you peddle them because you can't keep them. And the same way with, 4 heads of cabbage. Well, a little steamed cabbage is nice, but you can't eat 4 heads. So we make sauerkraut.
True. And the process is very similar if you're making the pickles, if you're fermenting the pickles. I would just slice the pickles. I like garlic in mine, put some garlic, dill. We grow dill, so we put the dill in, and then maybe pickling spice, and then salt water. That's it. And then I weigh it down. I use this airlock. It's pretty much the same sort of process. So
going back to your kombucha, what do you do with the mother in between batches?
I almost always have a batch of it brewing.
So you're always keeping
it makes a quart. Oh, also when you do make it, so I said you have the tea, you should use a little bit of the starter because it's sugary tea, it could grow bacteria. So until it's built up enough fermentation, that wards off the bad guys. So you put a little bit of this prior batch in there. But you also, like right now, I'm not fermenting some kombucha because we aren't drinking as much right now. So I have it in a jar with some some kombucha covering it, and it's just in the fridge. Things live a long time in the fridge. Your starter lives in the, if you're not actively fermenting, it can usually go.
Kombucha is kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the sauerkraut. Like our brother-in-law makes kombucha, and he uses flavorings, and he leaves it longer so it's more carbonated. I mean, there's just a lot of things you can do with it. And again, I'm a purist. This is tea, sugar tea, fermented sugar tea. He's got flavorings and fruit, and I'm just plain girl. So that's how I make it. But there's a badillion you look on the internet, do the little bitty searches, and that's how I kind of got into it. I was like, wonder if you can make a sauerkraut in a mason jar. Yep, you sure can. And if you forget or lose my sheet, Google, sauerkraut in a mason jar. And it tells you, stuff it in a mason jar and salt, the amount of salt you need. And so it's pretty, the internet. What did we do before the internet?
You went to the library.
Oh, we did. I still do. Well,
and I may have ordered that book, so you'll be able to borrow it.
It's a great book. It is a very good book. Yeah, it's full of good information. In fact, I was gonna, I have it on the Kindle, which is fine, but sometimes you want to look at the book, and I was like,
well, we'll be getting it tried.
Okay, I'm so excited. And I seriously, people, if anyone wants it, I've always wanted to try kombucha, or I brought, if people want to taste it. Taste it? Okay. So I will pour some. Jim, you want to be my sister? Anybody want to try the sauerkraut? Or
well, and let's give Nancy and Jim a round of applause and thank them for the program, and chat with them and everything. So.
Okay, good.
Drink that, how much ever you should drink at a time.
Nice.
Like 12 cups.